the organization was looking for a long time to establish a mosque in Burnaby, and it took them many iterations working with City Hall to identify this as a potential site. It's a great location because it's near the civic precinct for Burnaby. So the museum is kitty corner here, City Hall, the Shadbolt Gallery. So it's a very appropriate civic location for this institution. So the first thing I really wanted to do is to create this sort of like urban edge for this mosque. So you'll see this sort of wall that terminates with the minaret. So that creates kind of an acoustical buffer, and I put a lot of the more utilitarian uses behind this wall. So you'll see the kitchen down at the lower level behind here. There's washrooms, the women's washrooms are upstairs. There's the office here. So that creates an acoustical buffer from the sound that I was just talking about. But I didn't want it to be kind of a forbidding kind of wall, very kind of like us and them. So the portal, the domed portal, kind of pokes out, welcoming visitors. So if you look from across the sea, across the road, you'll see that the whole idea of this sort of portal that's piercing this wall, that sort of the idea is to welcoming visitors and Muslims alike. So this wall, you'll see up on top the calligraphy in brick. This is it says Allah. So each one of those little things says Allah, which is God in Arabic, and you'll see it repeating itself. And you'll see in other parts, you'll see that I've used the same idea. And the idea here is that God is present in all materials. So you'll see it repeating in maybe fabric, in brick, in metal, in glass, etching. So the idea here is that God is everywhere, within all materials, all around us. So that's, and it's in a repetitive form, and many faiths, including Islam, the repetitive prayer is very meditative, and so they're often very similar to. I'll just pull this out here. Very similar to, I think in Catholics is like this is called a sibha, which is tasbih, which is you just repetitive prayer, and you count how many prayers. I think in Catholicism there's something similar called the rosary, and so that's what we have here. It's a sort of a repetitive prayer, and then there's a passage from the Quran on the granite there. So I'll talk a little bit more about calligraphy and geometric pattern when we get into the courtyard. I just want to mention that the minaret is traditionally where the call to prayer is projected, or usually in times before amplification, sound amplification, the muezzin would go up into the balcony of the minaret and shout out the call to prayer 5 times a day. And typically the height of the minaret was relative to the geographic area that it served. So the higher the minaret, that it means they're trying to project that voice to a bigger geographic area. And it was also in tight, Islam started, once it spread through North Africa and the Middle East, it was always in a very tight kind of urban settings. And so the minaret, through alleys and stuff, you'd be able to identify where the mosque is through the minaret. And this is really what it is here. It's really just an urban symbolic element here, really, just to say this is a mosque. This is the only reason for it to be there. I mean, it's just sort of, and it's completely brick, structural brick. There's no steel in there except the reinforcing within the brick. And the corbelling up top. And this was actually inspired, my office at the time was down in Gastown, and a lot of the brick detailing was inspired by the brickwork in Gastown. I would go there, and you'll see it like the corbelling up there is very similar to some of the older brick buildings in Gastown. We got a masonry award for this project because of the intricate brickwork and the unique minaret. From across the street, you can actually see right through it because it's got glass corners. Any questions? Okay, we'll move into the courtyard.
How old is the building? Sorry.
How old?
Yeah.
It was built over a 10-year period, so it was very long back. I was commissioned to do it in 1998. Mm-hmm. I think it didn't actually get finally finished till about 2008.
Oh.
Yeah. So this tent isn't usually here. They've erected this tent for the month of Ramadan. They would have the breaking of the fast would happen here, and so just in case it rained or whatever, so they'd have tables set up here. But this is a temporary structure. So in many areas of the Middle East, they would often design buildings, mosques, even residences around courtyards. So again, this provided in a sort of dense towns, this provided ventilation for in hot climates. It also provided outdoor space that's sort of safe and contained. And this is sort of the idea why I wanted to create this mosque around a courtyard as well. Not so much for ventilation, but for light, because it's a big building, and so to bring in light to deep into the building, I wanted to create this courtyard. Additionally, a lot of, and not specific to mosques, but all religious assembly buildings, a lot of the socialization actually happens after people come out of the prayer hall. Not necessarily. The prayer hall is a spiritual, often singular activity of prayer, and it's like the community and the social fabric and the between people happens once they come out of the prayer hall, whether it's in the lobby, kids running around, parents, and so I wanted to create a safe space, again, very close to the highway, where parents didn't have to worry about their kids being, in traffic or whatever. So this creates an outdoor area that's safe, protected, but still, obviously in close proximity to a busy street. There's a famous, a great Egyptian architect called Hassan Fathi, and he would always say, the courtyard provides you with your own private piece of the sky. I really like that analogy. So it's like when you're in a courtyard, you look up and that's your little private piece of the sky, and I really like that as an inspirational point. So you'll see here, we can see right through, this is the prayer hall here, we can see the trees right through. So this is the idea, is that you get a lot of visual, so even though the rooms are broken up, you can still feel the side, it sort of expands out. And once you go into the prayer hall, you'll see this whole notion of the borrowed landscape, where you're borrowing from outside to bring it into the space. So if we step out here, you'll see the Allah as well in the medallion here in the middle of this aluminum railing. So as I mentioned outside, related to the brick, it's similarly in here. And this is, the idea here, this is a very low budget project or economical. So it's not, gilded in marble. Every penny had to be raised in that multi-purpose hall there. So, dollar by dollar. So there's no extravagant materials here. So if you see here, this is an aluminum railing that you see in many kind of like basic residential buildings. But here we try to give it a little bit more. So even though it's a it's a fairly affordable product. We try to, giving it some shape, giving it this idea that even in this very modest material, God is present. So you'll see that repeating in different materials: brick, metal, glass, fabric, etc. So in Islam, the depictions of animals and people in art is not encouraged. And so you see, that's where the development, like they went to the calligraphy and geometric patterns with the assistance of mathematics, etc., became very advanced in Islamic art and architecture. So you'll see very different forms of calligraphy. You'll see geometric patterns in tile work, in fabrics, and so that's the reason why they pushed the limits with calligraphy and the integration of calligraphy with geometric patterns is because you'll see very little kind of depictions of animals, humans, and definitely not any depiction of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that was, even in movies now, I think you'll see a shadow or something like that, but that was very, I don't know, not encouraged. I'm going to say I'm not a religious person, so I've self-studied. Like I went to school in University of Oregon, so I think Islamic architecture was like 1 hour of one course. So like when I got my first mosque project, there was a lot of studying that I did on my own. And I always say I'm not a pious person, but I make a lot of pious people happy through my projects, and that's where I'm getting points upstairs. Okay, so we'll move to the lobby unless somebody has any questions. We'll talk about materials, choice of materials and stuff inside, but if nobody...
I was just wondering about the pillars.
What about them? Well, you'll see the similar pillars inside, and the idea was to use local materials. So these are all Douglas fir, and you'll see inside they're a lot taller, and there's a lot of use of. So you brought it up, so I'll continue with the idea of materials. So I tried to source as many local materials as possible. The idea is that Islamic architecture, contrary to what a lot of people think, is a very kind of a regional approach. So if you take out the 20th century and you look at Islamic architecture all the way from China to Western Africa, you'll see that each region developed its own kind of, I don't like to use the word style, but kind of like their own kind of language of architecture. And it was very much influenced by local materials, local environment, local crafts, and so you'll see the mud brick houses in Western Africa versus wood structures in Malaysia and Indonesia, where it's very tropical. They lift them up. And so a stone in the Middle East, more stonework. So that's what I really tried to do here. It's like I'm trying to use local materials, respond to our weather here in BC, use local craftspeople, and so that I didn't want a building to feel like it landed here from somewhere else, right? Because that's a lot of the times that's my biggest struggle. They'll bring me a calendar from back home. It's like, this is what we want the mosque to look like. And it's because a lot of the people I work with are first generation or recent immigrants, and so what they bring with them is an image of the mosque in their village or in their countries, which is but the strength is we'll be sitting around the table, and there'll be somebody from India, Pakistan, Egypt, Africa, Bosnia, and what I say is like, what's your image of a mosque? And invariably they're all going to be different. And so I say, so that's really our strength here, is we have to collectively come up with a Canadian regional Islamic architecture. And so that's what, through all my project, whether I'm successful or not, is I'm trying to do that. So locally sourced wood, the brick is from Washington State, you know, and so on and so forth. So zinc, and also materials that are going to last for a long time. This is not a temporary building. The idea here is that we're building for 100+ years. So it's concrete structure, wood, zinc. The zinc on the domes here is going to outlast all of us many times over. Sorry, it was a long-winded answer to your... Okay, we'll go inside. This is sort of the mingling area sort of that I was talking about, that when people come out of the prayer hall. So really there's not a lot of liturgical requirements to a mosque, unlike other religious buildings where there's a lot of ceremonies and stuff like that. A mosque is really, it's just a clean space oriented to Mecca, and not required but always helpful is to have a place for ablution. So there's a ritual wash that Muslims do before they pray, wash their hands, faces, arms, feet, and so that happens here. And in a mosque, the men and women pray in separate spaces. Whole different discussion. We're not going to get into it now, but I can, if there's some specific questions, I can answer them. And so this is the men's ablution, and there's a mezzanine floor that we'll pass by when we go up to the sisters' space, where their ablution is there and washrooms are there. We need to take off our shoes and put them on the racks before we go into the prayer hall, and that's it.
One quick
Yeah.
question: do they use this same space to pray in, the men and women?
No,
Just at
there's a
different
prayer space. No, they pray at the same time.
but in different locations.
Yeah, you'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, the prayer hall, and it's oriented. You can't tell now, but it is at about 15.5 degrees east of north, true north, and that's the shortest distance between Vancouver and Mecca. A lot of people think it should be east, but actually it's over the pole is the shortest line to Mecca. So there's a couple of sort of design concepts I want to sort of highlight here. So this is the mihrab. This sort of like signifies the access to the qibla. The qibla is the direction towards Mecca. It's called the qibla. So this signifies the direction to Mecca. There's the sermon happens here, and the imam stands on, does different things, stands on the ground, but up there. But one of the things about this mihrab that if you're familiar with mosque architecture, a lot of times it's very similar to this is an alcove structure in the front of the mosque, but it's very rarely in glass. It's usually a solid, ornate and it's got calligraphy or verses from the Quran or whatever, but it's very, very rarely glass. So the reason why I wanted to do it in glass is to really express in a strong way that this mosque doesn't stop here, that we're connected to a place very far away, to Mecca, and that these lines, while straight here on this micro level, on a macro level, this is part of a large circle. That if you think of Mecca as the center, there's these concentric circles all emanating all out of there that connect us all. So that yes, we're connected spiritually to a geographic location of Mecca, but we're also, as a community, we're all connected. So these lines that we don't stand here alone. That there's a community beyond this building, beyond Vancouver. There's a global community that connects us all together. So really I wanted to really express that and say, okay, yeah, this is a mosque, but it's not an individual location of prayer. It's part of a community. And that actually the walls are just sort of are there to keep out the environment, weather, noise, but really we're all connected on a global level. And I wanted to balance this axis, this horizontal axis to Mecca with a vertical axis up, sort of signifying our connection up to God, who lives or exists above us but all around us. But spiritually the heavens are always, you ascend to the heavens, and so there's the light comes through here. The borrowed landscape that we're also bringing in from the North Shore Mountains, from the parquet here, brings the greenery into the space and enriches the space further. And light here even in the darkest, grayest day of the year, they still don't have to turn on the artificial lights here because of the skylights that come in. And the skylights, again, these are the cheapest type of skylights you can get. You see them at Best Buy, Home Depot. These are your basic acrylic, the largest acrylic skylights. They're like $500 each. But by rotating them in relation to the structure, by creating that star shape, we're giving very kind of modest materials, modest products, lifting them up and saying, even the most modest things can be beautiful when treated in the right way. The pillars here, there's 5 of them, and it's serendipitous. People say, oh, look, the 5 pillars, they represent the 5 pillars of Islam. It was serendipity. I did not specifically say I want 5 pillars to represent the 5 pillars of Islam, but somehow that's how it turned out. So the other thing I wanted to really make an effort to do is, in many purpose-built mosques, in many mosques that are converted, the sister space is always an afterthought. It's like, oh yeah, we'll do it down here, in this corner, in the back, downstairs. And I wanted the spaces to feel that we're praying together. Yes, because of modesty, etc., we're in separate rooms or in separate spaces, but we're in one room, we're under one sky praying to one God. And so that's why you'll see this ceiling extending up, representing, everything is the same up there, representing, say, we're all praying together in one space under one sky. And so that was really important, and you'll see that in many of them, making a big effort to make the spaces so there isn't a hierarchy of spaces. There isn't one space that has a dome, one space that doesn't, one space that's got a So the idea here is that we're in different parts of the same place. That yes, we're all. So that was really the intent behind making this one big ceiling treatment structure extend beyond. And you actually see that the space up there is larger than this space here. Local material. Okay, so I know a lot of you are artists. So this is my own design, this prayer rugs here. And you'll see this geometric pattern here is the same one that's on the mihrab, in the mihrab there. And so the idea here is that everybody's got their own little piece of the mihrab with them. And though while these are 2 by 4, kind of representing an individual prayer rug, people don't actually stand here. People end up being squished. So you'll see, you know, in a 3 rug area, you might see 4 or 5 people. So it's not like, oh, hey, get off my spot here. So they're just more symbolic, right? And these we worked. These actually, most carpets are in North America are made in Georgia, in the U.S. And so these were, even though it's a Quebec company that's Beaulieu, Canada, they actually get fabricated there. So, you know, we picked the colors, and they're a little bit faded from when I first picked them because I've been here for a while, but I still really like them. And we looked at various designs, and we got some samples, different colors, and we went with that. And you'll also see that same pattern on the entrance door there at, into the prayer hall. Behind us there is what we call the multi-purpose hall. The idea there is that for different functions, whether it's social functions, interfaith functions, they have Eid celebrations there, and so it's a space where many things. The intent was as well that they could do, and they do. I think they have indoor soccer and badminton and stuff. So it's a very, very well used space back there. And also for overflow prayer. So like on big days when Eid or on Fridays, these doors open up and they roll out carpets with the same design. They put them down, and people, the lines extend into there. And that's why the women's prayer hall is larger, because their overflow space is not behind them, but in the classrooms back there. I think I've covered most things here. Any questions?
Is it okay to take photos?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about sort of the symbolism of the shapes that you've chosen?
I don't want to put too much into it's just what I like. There's no symbolism, doesn't represent anything. So it's just sort of decorative, really. All geometric pattern was really decorative. And, you know, here, there is calligraphy there. This is the testimony of faith. Ashhadu anna la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammad Rasulullah. You'll see it in there. So that has a very significant meaning. So a lot of the calligraphy will have meaning, either passages from the Quran or testimony of faith or Allahu Akbar, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the calligraphy has a lot of meaning, but really the geometry and the geometric patterns that you see in textiles and tile work and many other materials are just purely decorative.
And some of them, will they represent different regions?
No, not really. I mean, you'll see a lot of tile work coming out of Iran. So different regions had different strengths. Some areas had developed a lot of their rugs and their textiles were highly developed. For example, in Turkey and Iran, and then you get the tiles in Morocco and North Africa, and some of that are really highly. And so it's not really, this is the star that represents this, but really it's more local crafts that really flourished. In Egypt, there was a lot of the granite and the calligraphy and stuff like that. Further in Asia, in Pakistan and northern India, there's a lot of woodwork. You'll see, lattice work and stuff like that. So different regions sort of developed different, depending on what the materials they had available. In Timbuktu and that, the mud brick, there's the largest mud UNESCO heritage site in the mosque in Timbuktu is, very, and so that's more of how it developed on a regional level.
So it's more of, could you describe it as being sort of universal in terms of?
So that's the thing that ties them together. While every place developed different materials, what tied them together was the calligraphy and this sort of borrowing of ideas of oh yeah, these are really beautiful patterns, how can we apply them to our crafts, you know? And so that's what you'll see in a lot of parts of the world. Those, you know, that's what connects them, that's what sort of like unifies them. But if you look at each region, it's very distinct. But that all got thrown out, like with a lot of other things in modern architecture in the 20th century, where materials, it was really easy to transport materials. There was air conditioning, heating, so you don't really had to care, you know, where's the sun coming out? And so that all got thrown out, and it became, you see mosques that are built in the last, 100 years, it's just a collection of symbols. Oh, we got to have arches. Oh, we got to have it. And so and they borrow from different regions, and it looks bad.
I think this is the only mosque I've ever heard of that had a community engagement process, and I was very curious about like what decisions were community decisions, what were architectural, and how that whole process took place.
Well, really, the community effort is from the people who run. And I've worked with, I've been fortunate to work with many groups, and this is under an umbrella. This is a branch of the BC Muslim Association, and I've worked with other branches of the BC Muslim. This is by far the most sort of outreaching group, and it's just, but that influenced the process, and that's why the design process for this took a lot longer than others. While others, while other projects, there was like this kind of like strong leader that pushed, very tenacious, and they got built faster, and they got done, kind of more efficiently. This process was very kind of like consensus building. So we'd have, we'd meet, and we'd meet again, and we'd meet again, and until, like, the issue, I can't tell you how many projects I've had to, talk people down from the dome, right? Like, I mean, I know I have a little dome there, but it's not part of the building, and it's not, part of the prayer hall. Like, how could you have a mosque without a dome? So, it's a whole different discussion. So it was very consensus building. So it influenced, I wouldn't say, the fact that the building is perceived as beautiful and welcoming is very good to that notion of community building, outreach, etc. I think that helps, that people are curious, they want to come, that helps. But I think more so the community influenced the design process rather than the building. Before I was even on the scene, I think it was a very inclusive community that really wanted to engage with the, versus others that were very kind of insular, and even within our meetings, they'd break off in different languages, and I wouldn't even know what was going on, and and it was very kind of opaque. And even though I'm right there and trying to engage people, so this is credit to this community as being really wanting to engage, and it's it's a struggle, because some people are more insular and say, why do we have to do that? But yeah, it's really the community that pushes it, and there's a good leadership in that regard at this mall, and it's very inclusive. It's in terms of different ethnicities. There's a really large Bosnian community in Burnaby that's involved in this mosque, and while this was being built, there was like a Bosnian kind of mosque community center that was rented, and they were using it there. And so, I was not aware of this until I came to BC. The largest ethnic group of Sunni Muslims up until very recent, I think still is, are from Fiji. Before I came here, I didn't know there was Muslims in Fiji, and they're all from the Indian subcontinent. They came with the British to Fiji, and then eventually moved up here. But which is very interesting, because they were disconnected from the rest of the Muslim world for almost a century. So they were kind of like, they had to maintain. And so they are very strong about, because they were a minority group within Fiji, they really knew how to form communities where, you know, the Arabs, for example, that are here, it's very hard for them to, because, you know, back where they came from, you know, the state provided the schools, the mosques, everything else. It wasn't a community, you know, this is really a lot closer to the mosques at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where it was not just a place of worship. It's, you know, where education happens, where the judicial process happened within the community, where it was a safe haven for travelers, schools, everything happened in the mosque. And the mosques in the West are a lot closer to that than the mosques in the Middle East or in countries where it just functions as a prayer. You go, you pray, you leave. And it's something that, it's an institutional building that the government builds, you know, every little neighborhood gets a mosque. And so very different, very different. And so when people from Muslim dominant countries come to Canada, unlike say people who are from Fiji or whatever, they don't know how to create this sense of community and like come together and create this. They learn it over time, but initially it's like, you know, you got to go so many hours of volunteer work, and, you know, it's like, another meeting, you know, where you don't get anything done, you know, but they, you know, they do, and it's a different, you know, and then this is what, you know, they create. And really a lot of them put a lot of faith in me, you know, a lot of these groups put a lot of faith in me because I was not giving them what they wanted necessarily in terms of like an image of a mosque. And so, you know, I remember when this first came up and it got built, and the chairman was like, when's the arch coming in? I'm like, there's no arch. I was like, didn't you read the drawings? And then really with every project, there's more faith and more trust in me. Initially I was like, you know, and then a lot of times like, oh wow, this is really beautiful. And they don't, you know, they're not able, sometimes are not able to articulate, oh yeah, this is, you know, but it's different from what I'm used to. And so when more people come and say, oh yeah, this is a really great space or whatever, then they feel, oh yeah, you know, we have something special here. So we'll walk up, we'll put our shoes on and then take them off again. We'll go to the women's prayer space, and we'll just look upstairs. This usually takes an hour or so, and then you guys are more than welcome to stick around and walk around and whatever. Questions? That's it? Yeah, go ahead.
I really find this is the most remarkable feature I've ever had experience of in a mosque.
That's great.
You know, like you talk about Arthur Erickson, his relationship to inside and outside in many of his buildings, and he looked at Japanese buildings and how they related, both in terms of light, air, but particularly this idea of inside and outside.
Yeah.
Nature is with us.
Yeah.
You know, I'm
Good.
I just really
Good.
appreciate this moment sitting
The other thing I didn't mention about this is that what I was trying to do is, if you'll see that the geometric pattern gets denser as it gets to the center, and then as you get to the very center, it opens up. The idea is like, yeah, this is sort of like the axis there. So
I happen to be in the most opportune spot where what lines up right in the center is the center of this tree. So
right.
I'm thinking, did you see there was already this vista to be, or was it something you added to, managed, planted?
no, that's a little park. It's a City of Burnaby Park there.
So sitting on the floor.
Yeah, it's very actually hard, you know, because you can't, you know, when it's before the building's there, it's hard for you to get at the exact, unless you've got a lift and you start to, so, you know, there's a lot of, you know, obviously, I try to do as much site planning as possible, but it's, you can't, you know, just similar to the columns, it's like there's serendipity there, and, you know, things come together, and, you know.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been to so many mosques.
Yeah.
It's you said, it's totally different, but it definitely you've created that spiritual, welcoming space, and it feels great. But I also know that a lot of old mosques back the courtyard has water. Water is a big part of it in a pound. Like, is that a reason that you don't
Well,
do that?
we have so much water here.
Okay.
You know, a lot of times the celebration of water is in a hot climate where the sound of bubbling water is cooling and soothing, and it actually creates a cooling environment when you have water in a hot space. We debated that, you know, put a fountain in the middle or not, and we did. And we have so much water here, you know, and if you look at fountains downtown, most of the year nobody's paying attention, they're going green, they drain them sometimes. So here, there's so much water coming out of the sky. There's actually a fish-bearing stream here, so that was the reason. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
The glasswork is beautiful, but how important is it to have the timepieces here? Is there any significance
To
the clock?
Yes, the clock is, I really don't like it here. There's another one there, but you know that we pray 5 times a day, and every day the time changes because it's really relevant to the sun. So the call to prayer and everything, every day it's different from the day before. So the sunset is, you know, sunset prayer is like, it shifts a minute every day, and so that's why the clock is very important. The spiritual practice is very tied to the sun, to the moon. You know, it's a lunar calendar, so and that's why time is important. It's part of that whole, you know.
So
Yeah.
it's tied to the cosmos, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's where I was going with it.
yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, but I really don't. First of all, you know, this is a cheap IKEA clock that they put up there, and they had a nice one before. But I really think it's better. You know, the only person who really needs to see the time is the imam, and so that's. I think I've always encouraged them to just leave it there. But you know, at some point you've got to let go. You can't sort of micromanage. There's so many. It's a community, and there's so many people, and everybody wants to, you know, put in their, you know, 2 cents, and so, you know, you gotta work with it. I mean, fortunately, they still ask me to provide input. Other mosques, you know, they've done, you know, all kinds of stuff that's, you know, now they're running into trouble. Oh, we didn't get a permit, you know, we took out this parking space and we put this room, and it's like, you know, it's like, you know, that's the way, you know, it's done elsewhere, right? Like, it's like, oh yeah, we need a room, well, let's just, you know, put one in here, and it's like, you know, but it's, but here, like, for example, we put an outdoor kitchen. There's another courtyard there that we'll peek into as well. And that was one of those ideas where now it functions really well, but it wasn't necessarily exactly as intended. The idea was that there's another little courtyard where kids can play while their parents are in the multipurpose hall. And just the way, you know, the choreography of the space and everything, it didn't quite work the way it was conceived, but then it found another use, and they've done an outdoor kitchen there that's used extensively with, you know, barbecues and stuff like that. So, should we move on? Okay. You know, it's there's compromise with collaboration, right? Like, you're not working, you know, in a void, like as a singular artist. And I can't work in a void. Like, I find if, like, you know, oh, you know, what if you designed your ideal mosque? I'm like, what's the site? I'm like, no site. I'm like, well, if I don't have parameters, if I don't have a client, if I don't have an environment, if I don't have, you know, zoning restrictions telling me, okay, this is the height you have to work with, that's where I find myself most creative, is when I'm, you know, there's all these kind of challenges, and then you create something. When it's just like a tabla rasa, like an empty canvas, it's like, you know, and so we can just go to the upper kind of balcony in the courtyard, and then you guys can walk downstairs. You can poke into the back courtyard. courtyard, and if there's any other questions, and I can answer them downstairs. So you met my brother recently, right?
A couple of times.
In a church where little nursing, basically in a lot of mosques, the women who are with very little kids felt that they weren't welcome because their kids would be very disruptive, crying kids. We're talking about like little toddlers that are with their mom. And they want to come to the mosque, they want to be part of the congregation, they want to pray. And so this is their space there where they can go in, and it's, a lot of times, the moms will just push the kids in there and you go in there, and it ends up being like a jungle gym. And so over time, there's always because this was one of the first mosques that was open like this, the spaces, a lot of times there were actually separate rooms. And so this, there was a lot of sort of community learning that how do we manage, like there's kids here, there's kids there, how do we manage without, being, okay, this group is noisy, we'll just put them somewhere else. The kids are always with the moms, so we'll just push the whole thing. But no, the kids also need to learn how to act in a mosque. They have to be. And there was cultural, it wasn't, there's certain cultures that are a little looser with, and I didn't know that, you learn from it. And in terms of children, they let their kids run around, and over time, the community sort of learns together that this is the mosque etiquette. When a kid, regardless if they're, 5 or whatever, once they're out of that room, when they're in their room, it's like they're toddlers or whatever, but once they're out of that room, there needs to be certain ways of acting, behaving, in a spiritual space. And so this is a way where the space actually affected the community. I was talking earlier about the community really driving the process, but this is one way where the actual design of the space, impacted, the group's sort of, I don't know what's it called, performance or activities or whatever. I always say that the sisters are closer to God up here, closer to the heavens. I have a little kind of a side story. When I was first designing this mosque, these two young sisters, they were kind of just my age. I started working on this. I was in probably my early 30s, and they were a little bit younger than me. And they wanted to have a meeting. We met in a coffee shop on Main Street, and they talked to me about this secret agenda. Their secret agenda was that they wanted the men. They were really active. They're. You may know them. I'm not going to mention names, but they were sort of activists. Feminist Muslims, and they were really into having the men and women praying, and that's the way that it was going to move, and they really wanted me to push that through the design. Let's create a space where men and women can pray together, etc., etc. And I said, you know what? I totally respect that, but I don't deal with secret agendas. Let's bring this to a community design forum. Let's bring up different options. So we had this big thing. We rented a community space, and I brought several design options, and we talked about the various iterations of the design, and men and women, and other things, not just the men and women spaces, but other things. And to my surprise, it wasn't the men, it was the older women who stood up very firm and said, no, we do not want to share the space. We don't want to share this. We don't want the constant issues and dynamics, the social dynamics of defending their space. What's their space? This is their space. Oh, all of a sudden one day there's more men. So, are we going to get pushed out? Is it, how defined is that space? they wanted their own space to make their own rules, to decide how is it, like very defined, very separate. They said they don't want to have this constant issues day in, day out of like, you know, well, some guy, some, you know, zealot who was like, or whatever, oh no, you know, and so it was very, and so the young women, you know, they accepted that. But, you know, I said, I don't know, maybe in 100 years things might change. They might be the same, but things might change. So you'll notice in the prayer hall downstairs, I've got 2 doors on that wall and 2 doors from the multi-purpose hall. So sometime in the future, you know, potentially there could be a division this way, there could be a division back to front. So in all spaces I tried to make it flexible so that, you know, we don't know how the community is going to evolve, you know, after we're gone in 100 years, you know, and so rather than like create spaces that are rigid and very fixed, trying to keep things open so that, you know, as things evolve over time, that this space could potentially accommodate it, similar to that courtyard that I was talking about upstairs, so that it's not, you know, bigger spaces, more flexibility, more doors, that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's it. So I don't know how, I'm assuming most people are from BC here, but this is, we have a fairly, compared to other places in Canada, we have a fairly mild weather here. And so this is why I created this sort of outdoor corridor or outdoor hallway rather than having it inside. Initially the building was conceived so that there's 2 classrooms up there, 2 classrooms and a classroom and a library downstairs there. And so the idea was that you didn't have to open up the whole building if they just had some classes on the weekend, etc. As it happens is they use every corner for weekend classes, so they use the whole building. But that was the idea here, and to link up these rooms with an outdoor corridor because we have a mild climate most of the year. And B, the outdoor corridors didn't count as part of the square footage. So, you know, I get a bigger building. So, in fact, when the building was built, the planners were like, why is it so big? You know, because the square footage, you know, you look at it, but you put a courtyard in the middle, you put these things, all of a sudden it's like, it's taken up the whole site. And so they really wanted to maximize the site. They're only going to be building on this, so we pushed it to the very limit. So this was part of doing that, is doing these outdoor corridors that don't really, outdoor stair in the corner there also didn't count as part of the square footage. So it's all legal. So yeah, that's it. I mean, I hope the library's open. You guys can walk it, you know, hopefully that you can go through those doors and the library's open, but we can make our way downstairs. This is the zinc dome, and it was done by a Bosnian tradesperson who's a metal roofer, and he was very excited to do this in zinc tiles. And it was each tile, obviously, on each row is a different size, so it all had to be cut, and they all get smaller and tapered. And he did a really good job. Sinad. All right.
It has a look of a beehive burner.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, it does.
You can see it on the Fraser River.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the projects take a long time, gestation period and process, and in fact I really enjoy that. I feel that when you try to compress the design process in a really short time, it's not always the best, and I find there's a sense of discovery and over time, and that, you know, like, you know, I hate it when it's like, oh, 3 months we got to do the building, design it, build it, and, you know, and I find that I like the stretch. So some things can't change like over time, right? Like decided on the structure or whatever. Like certain things get decided earlier on, but as time goes on, they,
So would some of it have like maybe an organic process? Certain
Yeah.
stages are.
yeah, for sure. I mean, this is a very, it's a building that has to stand up and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But for example, the details, the exact, like the brickwork. I didn't have to really design the exactly. I knew this is what I wanted to do, so I would always kind of put a placeholder there. Said okay, and so I don't have to, design the carpet, the brick, all in a very compressed time. And so there's like, and also getting input from tradespeople. So sometimes if I just design it before there's tradespeople involved in the project, they'll come by and say, oh, well, I can't do this. But you've also got to always push tradespeople, because tradespeople, they want to do it the way they've done it for 30 years. And if they do it that way, it's like going to look like everything else. So you sort of like engage them and see what they can do. And they enjoy it. Like I find like the Masons really enjoyed doing this and really kind of like stepped up and really, so that's where I enjoy the long process.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we have
Okay.
I'll hold that.
Oh, okay. There's some coffee here. Oh, and some chocolate. Any other questions, Zareen?
I guess some design for mosques with the latitude that you've been provided, or is it?
Yeah, well, every community is a little bit different. Every site is very different, right? And so wherever I engage the community, do the site research, see what are the neighbors like? Is it an urban setting? Is it a rural setting? And so that all that sort of comes in. The bigger the building, it has to be non-combustible because of the code. Smaller mosques can be wood, so there's more. So everything sort of like it's all part of that. And so. And that's why it's not going to be, none of my projects are cookie cutter, because you can't, take something from Prince George, and put it in Burnaby. Prince George is a big site, and, it's, I'm looking at a much bigger landscape, fitting in a much bigger landscape. And so that's how it's sort of like, it's a very sort of regional, very kind of like a site-specific response, right? But also, trying to keep it part of that global Islamic, so people can recognize, so it doesn't look like something else, so that, so it fits in Burnaby. People who are non-Muslims can say, oh yeah, this is a great building, it fits really nicely in Burnaby, but the Muslims who come here can also say, oh yeah, I can relate to that. So there's, on many different levels, it's got to work, right?
Yeah, so I just think you didn't have to go to a larger body of approvals.
No, yeah, exactly.
It's community.
It's community-based. I mean, the only thing would be City Hall, right? Like sometimes, but there's no other higher kind of like the Catholic Church, for example, where, you got to go, they...
You don't have to do that.
No.
I think it's great.
Yeah. Thanks.
I was just wondering if this site was really important.
Nope, it was a gas station. Yeah, they just one that would the city would allow them to build a public building, because you can't build one in a residential. Yeah. So they looked for a while before they were able to secure this site.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Question about using the motifs and patterns and colors, because every culture has their